The morning sun cast long shadows across my backyard as I stood at the edge of what had once been my pride and joy, a crystal-clear swimming pool that had hosted countless summer barbecues, birthday parties, and lazy Sunday afternoons. Now, it was nothing more than a gaping concrete crater, drained of every last drop of water, its blue tiles gleaming like broken dreams under the relentless Arizona heat. I never thought I'd see the day when my own pool would become the center of a neighborhood controversy. But then again, I never anticipated having Karen Whitmore as a next-door neighbor. If you've never encountered a true Karen in the wild, consider yourself blessed. Karen was the kind of person who measured her property line with a ruler, documented every leaf that dared to fall from my oak tree onto her immaculate lawn, and had the homeowners association on speed dial. The pool had been empty for exactly 3 weeks, 2 days, and 14 hours, not that I was counting obsessively or anything. The decision to drain it hadn't been made lightly. My wife Sarah had been battling cancer for the better part of 2 years, and between the mounting medical bills and the specialized treatments not covered by insurance, maintaining a pool had become a luxury we simply couldn't afford. The chemicals alone cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and hiring a pool service was out of the question. Sarah had always been the one who loved the pool most. She'd float on her back for hours, staring up at the desert sky, her bald head gleaming in the afternoon sun after her latest round of chemotherapy. The pool had been her sanctuary, her place of peace during the storm of treatments, doctor visits, and sleepless nights filled with worry. When she passed away 6 months ago, I couldn't bear to look at the empty water, knowing she'd never float in it again. But practical necessity had ultimately forced my hand. The pool pump had finally given up the ghost, and replacing it would cost nearly $3,000, money I simply didn't have. The insurance company had categorically refused to cover Sarah's experimental treatment, leaving me with a mountain of debt that seemed to grow larger every time I opened the mailbox. So I'd made the difficult decision to drain the pool and try to figure out my next steps. That's when Karen entered the picture like a hurricane in a perfectly pressed pantsuit. I first noticed her lurking around the fence line about a week after I'd finished draining the pool. She'd appear at odd hours, early morning, late evening, sometimes even during my lunch break when I was working from home. At first, I thought she was just curious about the construction noise from the pool equipment removal. But as days turned into weeks, her behavior became increasingly bizarre. She started taking photographs. Not subtle ones, mind you, but obvious, deliberate shots with a camera that looked like it belonged to a professional photographer. She'd stand right at the property line, sometimes even leaning over the fence, capturing every angle of my empty pool as if she were documenting a crime scene. When I finally worked up the courage to approach her about it, the conversation went about as well as you'd expect. "Excuse me, Karen," I called out one Tuesday morning, finding her crouched behind her prize-winning rose bushes with her camera, trained on my backyard. "Is there something I can help you with?" She straightened up with the dignity of someone who'd been caught doing something perfectly reasonable, brushing imaginary dirt off her khaki capris. "I'm documenting the neighborhood decline," she announced, as if this explained everything. "Neighborhood decline?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "That eyesore," she said, pointing an accusatory finger at my pool. "Do you have any idea what that's doing to our property values? I've already had 3 potential buyers for the Henderson house down the street. Ask about that empty pool situation. It's affecting everyone, David." The way she said my name made it sound like a communicable disease. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't help anything. "Karen, I understand your concern, but I'm dealing with some financial challenges right now. The pool will be taken care of as soon as I can manage it." "Financial challenges?" she practically sneered. "That's not my problem. We have neighborhood standards to maintain. There are rules about property maintenance in our HOA agreement." This was news to me. "What rules, exactly?" Karen's face lit up with the kind of gleeful satisfaction that only comes from being right about something nobody else wants to hear. Section 4.2.b of the Homeowners Association Guidelines clearly states that all recreational water features must be maintained in a clean and functional condition. An empty pool is considered a safety hazard and an aesthetic violation. I stared at her, wondering if she'd actually memorized the HOA handbook or if she was making this up on the spot. "Karen, "I appreciate your concern, but no buts," she interrupted, holding up her hand like a traffic cop. "I'm giving you 2 weeks to rectify this situation. If you don't, I'll be forced to take action." The threat hung in the air between us like desert heat shimmer. I wanted to tell her exactly what she could do with her 2-week ultimatum, but I also knew that antagonizing her would only make things worse. Instead, I nodded and walked away, hoping that maybe she'd find some other neighborhood crisis to occupy her attention. I should have known better. The next morning, I awoke to find an official-looking letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, citing the exact section Karen had mentioned the day before. The letter informed me that I had 14 days to remedy the pool situation, or face daily fines starting at $50 and increasing by $10 each day thereafter. $50 a day. I did the math in my head and felt my stomach drop. At that rate, I'd be looking at over $1,500 in fines within a month, money I definitely didn't have. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I couldn't afford to fix the pool, but I also couldn't afford not to fix it. Over the next few days, I watched Karen's surveillance operation expand. She installed what looked like a security camera pointed directly at my backyard, claiming it was for property protection. She started keeping a log of my daily activities, noting in a small notebook every time I came and went from my house. She even recruited her husband Bob, a mild-mannered accountant who seemed perpetually exhausted by his wife's crusades. "She's making me take photos now," Bob confided to me one evening as we both retrieved our garbage cans from the curb. "Says she needs comprehensive documentation of the situation." "Bob, this is getting out of hand," I said, keeping my voice low. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone's property values. I'm just trying to get back on my feet." He nodded sympathetically. "I know, David. I told her about Sarah, about the medical bills. She said that's not her problem and that everyone has struggles." The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had been gone for 6 months, and I was still learning how to navigate the world without her. The empty pool wasn't just a maintenance issue, it was a daily reminder of everything I'd lost, everything I couldn't afford to fix or replace. But Karen wasn't finished. Oh no, she was just getting started. 2 days before the HOA deadline, I came home from work to find her standing in my backyard, actually inside my property line, peering down into the empty pool with her hands on her hips. She was wearing latex gloves and had what appeared to be a measuring tape in her hand. "What are you doing?" I called out, jogging across the yard toward her. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. "I'm documenting potential safety hazards," she said, holding up her phone to show me she'd been taking more photos. "This pool is at least 8 feet deep. A child could fall in and be seriously injured. Or you're trespassing on my property." "I'm protecting the neighborhood," she shot back. "Do you see these cracks in the concrete? This entire structure could collapse. And what about mosquitoes? Standing water in the drain could become a breeding ground for disease." I looked where she was pointing. There was no standing water. I'd made sure of that when I drained the pool. The cracks she was referring to were actually expansion joints, perfectly normal for any concrete structure in Arizona's extreme temperature fluctuations. "Karen, I need you to leave my property." Now she straightened up, fixing me with a look that could have melted steel. "Fine, but I want you to know that I'm calling the city health department, the building inspector, and anyone else who will listen. This is a public safety issue now." As she marched back toward her house, I stood there in the fading evening light, staring down into the empty pool that had become the center of my existence. The concrete walls that had once held thousands of gallons of clear, cool water now seemed to mock me with their emptiness. Each tile reflected the dying sunlight like a broken mirror, creating a kaleidoscope of regret and financial anxiety. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had become so complicated by something as simple as an empty pool. Sarah would have known what to do. She'd always been the diplomatic one, the problem solver, the person who could find common ground with anyone. But Sarah was gone, and I was left to navigate Karen's escalating campaign of neighborhood warfare alone. The next morning brought a new horror. Karen had erected a sign in her front yard, a professional-looking placard that read, "Concerned Neighbors," for property values in bold red letters with SMAL. The morning of Tuesday, July 15th, started like any other summer day in Phoenix, brutally hot by 7 a.m. with the promise of becoming absolutely hellish by noon. I'd taken the day off work to meet with Inspector Rodriguez, spending the previous evening cleaning debris from the empty pool and organizing all my financial documents to explain why I couldn't afford the repairs. I was in the kitchen making my third cup of coffee when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Karen's voice, raised to a pitch that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. At first I thought she was having another argument with Bob about his failure to edge their lawn to her exacting standards. But as I listened more closely, I realized she was talking to someone on the phone. This is an emergency situation. She was practically screaming into her phone. There's a man next door who has created a death trap in his backyard, and the city isn't doing anything about it fast enough. I moved to the window overlooking her yard, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. Karen was pacing back and forth on her patio, gesticulating wildly with her free hand while clutching her phone with the other. She was wearing her standard uniform, pressed khakis, a polo shirt with some kind of bedazzled American flag design, and pristine white sneakers that looked like they'd never touched actual dirt. "I don't care if it's not technically flooded," she continued, her voice getting shriller by the second. "An empty pool is just as dangerous as a full one. What if a child falls in? What if there's a gas leak from the pool equipment? What if it collapses into a sinkhole? A sinkhole?" I had to give her credit for creativity, even if her grasp of basic physics was questionable. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down and explain the situation more clearly." The voice was faint, but I could hear it through her phone. Someone was actually listening to this nonsense. "My name is Karen Whitmore," she announced with the authority of someone introducing herself to the president. "I live at 1247 Desert Rose Lane, and I'm calling to report a major safety hazard at 1245 Desert Rose Lane. My neighbor has abandoned a swimming pool, and it's creating a dangerous situation for the entire neighborhood." Abandoned? I'd been living in the house for 8 years. The pool had been empty for less than a month. "The pool is completely empty," Karen continued, "and it's been like that for weeks. The owner is clearly neglecting his property, and I have reason to believe he may be engaging in illegal activities." "Wheat? What? Illegal activities? What kind of illegal activities?" the voice on the phone asked, and I found myself leaning closer to the window, straining to hear. "Well," Karen said, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper, but was still loud enough for me to hear clearly. "He's been acting very suspicious. He doesn't maintain his yard properly, he's behind on his HOA fees, and he's been seen going in and out of his house at odd hours." Odd hours. I worked from home and occasionally went to the grocery store. If that was suspicious behavior, half the neighborhood should be under investigation. "And the pool," she continued, warming to her theme, "could be being used for all sorts of illegal purposes. Drug manufacturing, body disposal, underground gambling, who knows what goes on in there. At night?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Body disposal?" In an empty concrete pool visible from at least 4 different houses, Karen's imagination was even more creative than I'd given her credit for. "Ma'am," the voice on the phone said, and I could hear, the patience wearing thin. "Are you reporting an actual emergency, or are you filing a complaint about a neighbor?" "This is an emergency," Karen shrieked. "That pool is a death trap. It's 8 feet deep with no safety barriers, no warning signs. Nothing. Any child could wander over there and fall in. It's basically a concrete grave waiting to happen." A concrete grave. She really had a flair for the dramatic. "Ma'am, has anyone actually been injured?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. I saw a cat near the edge yesterday. What if it had fallen in? What if a delivery person goes into the backyard and doesn't see the pool? What if there's an earthquake and the whole thing collapses?" An earthquake pool collapse. In Phoenix, where the last significant earthquake had been in 1887. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me carefully," the voice on the phone said, and I could hear the professional restraint starting to crack. 911 is for reporting actual emergencies, fires, medical emergencies, crimes in progress. What you're describing sounds like a civil matter between neighbors. This is not a civil matter." Karen's voice hit a register that probably caused dogs to howl 3 neighborhoods over. "This is a public safety crisis. If you won't send someone out here right now, I'm calling the mayor's office, the governor, and the president if I have to." "The president?" Karen was going to call the president about my empty pool. Ma'am, let me transfer you to our non-emergency line. No, Karen screamed. I am not hanging up until you send a police officer to investigate this situation. I am a tax-paying citizen, and I have rights. I was starting to feel a mixture of horror and fascination, like watching a car accident in slow motion. Karen had completely lost touch with reality, and she was doing it in spectacular fashion. Ma'am, what exactly would you like the police to do about an empty swimming pool? I want them to arrest the homeowner for creating a public nuisance. I want them to force him to fill in the pool or put up proper safety barriers. I want them to investigate whether he's using the pool for illegal activities. What makes you think there are illegal activities? He's been acting suspicious for weeks. He doesn't wave when I try to talk to him. He closes his blinds when I'm in my backyard. He's clearly hiding something. The irony was breathtaking. Karen was describing my attempts to avoid her increasingly. Unhinged surveillance as evidence of criminal behavior. Ma'am, avoiding conversation with neighbors is not illegal. It is when you're endangering the community, Karen shot back. I've done my research. Empty pools are breeding grounds for criminals. They use them for drug labs, illegal gambling, human trafficking. The dispatcher's voice had taken on a note of disbelief. In an empty swimming pool, you never know, Karen insisted. I've seen documentaries. At this point, I was starting to feel genuinely concerned for Karen's mental state. This level of paranoia and obsession couldn't be normal, even for someone with her particular personality type. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down and think about what you're saying. You're reporting a neighbor for having an empty pool and claiming it's being used for human trafficking. Do you understand how that sounds? It sounds like I'm the only person in this neighborhood who cares about safety, Karen bellowed. While everyone else is just ignoring this obvious hazard, I'm trying to protect our community. From an empty pool, from a dangerous empty pool. Do you have any idea how many people die in empty pools every year? I'm not sure that's a statistic. We track, the dispatcher replied, and I could hear something that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Well, you should, Karen declared, because it's about to become a statistic in this neighborhood if someone doesn't do something. There was a long pause on the line, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see how this absurd conversation would resolve itself. Ma'am, the dispatcher finally said, I'm going to send an officer to your location to take a report. But I need you to understand that this is not an emergency, and the officer will be responding when available after handling actual emergencies. Fine, Karen huffed, but I want it on record that I called this in before anyone got hurt. When that pool claims its first victim, I want everyone to know that I tried to prevent it. Your call is being recorded, ma'am. Good, and I want to speak to your supervisor about your attitude. This is a serious matter, and you're treating it like it's some kind of joke. I assure you, ma'am, we take all calls seriously. An officer will be with you shortly. They better be, and they better be prepared to take action. I have photographs, documentation, witness statements, the dispatcher interrupted. Well, I'm going to get witness statements, Karen clarified, without missing a beat. I'm sure once I explain the situation to the other neighbors, they'll all agree that something needs to be done. After a few more minutes of Karen repeating her demands and the dispatcher patiently explaining police procedures, the call finally ended. I watched Karen march back into her house, presumably to prepare for the arrival of law enforcement. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my empty coffee cup, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Karen had actually called 911 to report my empty pool as a public safety emergency. She'd accused me of everything from drug manufacturing to human trafficking. She'd threatened to call the president, and somehow she'd managed to convince a dispatcher to send a police officer. Later, I heard the crunch of gravel in Karen's driveway and looked out to see a patrol car pulling up to her house. Officer Martinez, according to his name tag, which I could read from my window, was a middle-aged Hispanic man who looked like he'd seen everything the job could throw at him and was perpetually unimpressed by human stupidity. Karen emerged from her house before the officer even got out of his car, clutching a manila folder that I assumed contained her documentation of my pool-related crimes. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she called out, pracked. The transformation from neighborhood nuisance to viral sensation began with a simple phone call from my nephew Jake, a 23-year-old college student who worked part-time at the local 911 dispatch center. I'd always known Jake was tech-savvy, but I never imagined that his digital skills would intersect with my Karen problem in such a spectacular way. "Uncle Dave," Jake said when he called me that evening, barely able to contain his laughter. "You're never going to believe what happened at work today. We had this woman call in about an empty pool, and she was absolutely insane. She kept talking about human trafficking and underground gambling, and she threatened to call the president." "Wait," I interrupted, my stomach dropping. "Was her name Karen?" "Yeah, Karen Whitmore." "Do you know her?" I explained the situation to Jake, who listened with growing amazement and periodic bursts of laughter. By the time I finished recounting the past month's events, he was practically hyperventilating. "Uncle Dave, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. Do you know that dispatcher she was talking to? That was Monica Radu. Been doing this job for 15 years, and she said it was the most ridiculous call she's ever taken. She literally had to mute herself twice because she was laughing so hard." "Jake, please tell me this isn't going to become a bigger problem." "Oh, it's definitely going to become a bigger problem," Jake said cheerfully, "but not the kind you're thinking. Monica already played the recording for half the department. Everyone's talking about the pool lady," the shift supervisor said. "It's the best training example he's ever heard for how not to use emergency services." I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. So they're not taking her seriously? Are you kidding? The police report Officer Martinez filed is 3 pages long, and half of it is just documenting all the crazy stuff she said. He actually wrote, and I quote, "Complainant appears to believe that empty swimming pools are centers of criminal activity and may pose a threat to national security." National security. Karen had managed to escalate an empty pool into a matter of national security. "Jake, this stays between us, right? I don't need this becoming some kind of public spectacle." There was a pause that lasted just a little too long. "Well, about that, Jake, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. But Monica might have mentioned it to her husband, who happens to be a blogger for the Phoenix New Times, and he might have submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the recording." My blood ran cold. The recording is going to be made public. All 911 calls are public record. Uncle Dave. The newspaper is planning to run a story about it. Something about when suburban anxiety goes too far, or the coronification of America. I'm not sure of the exact angle. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, wondering if it was possible for a situation to get any more surreal. My empty pool had gone from a personal financial crisis to a neighborhood dispute to a police matter to a potential news story. What was next? A documentary? As it turned out, a documentary was exactly what was next. The Phoenix New Times story ran 3 days later under the headline, "Local Woman Calls 911 Over Neighbor's Empty Pool." Hilarity ensues. The article was written by Tony Valdez, Monica Rodriguez's husband, and it was a masterpiece of deadpan humor that managed to present all the facts while letting Karen's own words speak for themselves. The story included excerpts from the 911 recording, Officer Martinez's report, and interviews with several neighbors who had witnessed Karen's escalating campaign against my pool. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was quoted as saying, "I've been watching this unfold for weeks, and I kept thinking it couldn't get any crazier." Then she called 911, and I realized I had no idea what crazy really meant. But the real bombshell came at the end of the article. Tony had embedded the full audio recording of Karen's 911 call. Within hours of the story going live, the recording had been shared thousands of times on social media. By the end of the week, it had over 1 million views on YouTube, where someone had uploaded it with the title, "Karen Calls 911 Over Empty Pool. Dispatcher Can't Even..." The comment section was a goldmine of reactions. "This dispatcher deserves a raise for keeping it together. I would have hung up after the human trafficking accusation." Plot twist, the pool is actually a secret government facility. Voice could be used as a torture technique. Someone needs to check on Karen's mental health. The recording spawned dozens of remixes, auto-tune versions, and reaction videos. TikTok users created elaborate skits recreating the call. Twitter users turned Karen's most outrageous quotes into memes. The phrase "concrete grave waiting to happen" became a trending hashtag. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the response from the 911 dispatcher herself. Monica Rodriguez had been contacted by a local radio station for an interview about the call, and her response was everything I could have hoped for and more. She spoke with the calm professionalism of someone who'd spent years dealing with the full spectrum of human behavior, but there was an undercurrent of barely contained amusement in her voice. In 15 years of emergency dispatch, I've taken calls about everything from alien abductions to neighbor disputes over lawn gnomes, Monica explained to the radio host. But I've never had anyone call 911 to report an empty swimming pool as a potential center of human trafficking operations. The caller was absolutely convinced that her neighbor was running some kind of criminal enterprise out of a concrete hole in his backyard. The radio host, clearly enjoying the story, pressed for more details. What was going through your mind? During this call, well, I have to maintain professional composure during all calls, but I'll admit that when she started talking about calling the president, I had to put her on hold for a moment to collect myself. My supervisor was listening in, and I could see him trying not to laugh. It was definitely a unique experience. Did you ever consider that maybe the caller had a point about safety concerns? Monica's response was perfect. An empty pool is significantly safer than a full pool. If someone falls into an empty pool, they might get bruised or break a bone. If someone falls into a full pool, they could drown. The callers seemed to have that backwards. The interview went viral almost immediately. Monica became something of a folk hero for her patient handling of Karen's increasingly unhinged demands. The radio station started selling T-shirts with her quote about concrete graves, with proceeds going to first responder charities. Meanwhile, Karen's reaction to her newfound internet fame was, well, it was exactly what you'd expect from Karen. She started by demanding that the newspaper retract the story, claiming it was fake news and that the recording had been edited to make her look bad. When Tony Valdez pointed out that the recording was unedited and publicly available, Karen accused him of being part of a conspiracy to destroy her reputation. She created a Facebook page called Neighborhood Safety Advocacy, where she posted daily updates about my pool, complete with new photos and increasingly elaborate theories about what I might be doing with it. Her posts attracted comments from people around the world, most of whom were clearly just there for the entertainment value. Day 47 of Empty Pool Watch, she wrote in one post. Still no water, still no safety barriers, still no action from authorities. I'm beginning to think there's a cover-up at the highest levels of government. The comments on that post were particularly entertaining. Have you considered that maybe it's a portal to another dimension? Plot twist. There never was a pool. It's all a hologram. Karen, please seek professional help. This is better than Netflix. Karen's response to the criticism was to double down. She started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for professional pool safety inspectors and legal action against negligent neighbors. The campaign raised exactly $37, mostly from people who thought they were contributing to a comedy show. She also began giving interviews to anyone who would listen. Local news stations, podcasters, blogger Karen was suddenly media's favy, spinning her story as a tale of one woman's brave fight against neighborhood negligence and government apathy. I'm not the villain here, she told Channel 12 News. I'm the victim. I'm the one who tried to prevent a tragedy. And instead of being thanked, I'm being mocked by people who don't understand the seriousness of the situation. The news anchor, clearly struggling to maintain journalistic objectivity, asked, but don't you think calling 911 was perhaps an overreaction? There is no such thing as an overreaction when it comes to public safety, Karen replied with absolute conviction. I'd rather be accused of caring too much than be responsible for someone's death. The interview was shared widely, mostly because of Karen's complete inability to see how her behavior appeared to others. She genuinely believed she was the hero of this story, the misunderstood crusader fighting against ignorance and negligence. But the real turning point came when someone created a live stream of my backyard. I'm still not sure who set it up. IP address traced back to a VPN, and the YouTube account was created specifically for this purpose. But somehow, someone had positioned a camera with a clear view of my empty pool and started broadcasting 24 hours a day under the title Empty Pool Cam, The Karen Chronicles. The stream attracted thousands,